Welcome to the Meria Heller Show, on the net since 2000 and still going strong. If you feel like you're not getting the real news, if you feel like you're not connected spiritually, you have found your home. Meria covers a wide range of topics as only a snarky New Yorker can. Straight up, no chaser. No censorship, no corporate sponsors, thus true freedom of speech. Your subscription gives you unlimited access as a member of the smartest audience on earth. Relax and enjoy the education. Now here's Meria.
Will do.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Welcome to the show. Today I have a great guest for you. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's an author. He's a publisher. He's also a native New Yorker, so I'm sure you'll enjoy our accents together. His name is Mitch Horowitz. He's a PEN award-winning historian. He's a longtime publishing executive. He's a leading New Thought commentator with bylines in the New York Times, Time, Politico, Salon, and the Wall Street Journal. He's done media appearances on Dateline NBC, CBS Sunday Morning, All Things Considered, Coast to Coast. He's also author of several books, including Occult America and One Simple Idea. Today we're going to talk about his latest book, which is The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality. So I'm very happy to have Mitch with me. Good morning, Mitch.
Good morning to you. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on the show. Mitch, I have to tell you, your book rocks. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, what I really like about it is it's one of those books where not only did I mark it up all over the place, but it makes me take pause and think. And in actuality, it showed me a lot of mistakes I've been making in my own, how could we call it, miracle creation. So I want to thank you for that because, listen, sometimes we get so busy with life, we forget the things that work.
Yes. Well, I wrote the book as a seeker, and I make the same mistakes. You know, I view my readers as part of a community of search, and I'm always interested in hearing people's testimony as well, because I write this book very much as an experimenter, as a seeker, as a searcher. Typically, I write as a historian, and this is the first practical book I've ever written. And it was very important to me because I felt I wanted to share with the reader really concrete techniques that are part of my own life.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I appreciated about it, is it's actually useful information. Instead of a lot of words, then you find yourself saying, what did I just read?
Right.
and you know, it brings me back to, you know, I have to think about years ago, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, when that movie The Secret came out. And it took the world by storm, well, the American world. But one thing I noticed, you know, as a spiritual teacher myself and having read the same people you did, because you mentioned so many of them in your book, that to me it just spoke of American greed, but it really was more wishful thinking than mentioning that you have to take action. Mm-hmm. And your book makes it very clear you have to take action.
Yeah. In a way, your actions themselves become a kind of metaphysical act. If you behave with passion, and if your psyche is really focused on something to the point where it's a deeply cherished, even obsessive aim, and I don't use obsessive as a negative term, when an individual is single-pointedly focused on something, it's usually always a guarantee that something substantial is going to occur. There's a necessity to involve ourselves fully in our tasks, and within that, I respect and I abide by the idea that the mind goes beyond the physical. The mind plays various roles in our lives, motor function, cognitive, and so on. But when you're emotionally and deeply invested in a task, and as you're alluding, a task means action, a task means taking steps, the mind is also there as a tool that evinces some kind of extra-physical agency, extra-physical force on what's going on. And I try to analyze in the book exactly what that is, but it's very clear that our generation is coming to accept, and I think has been led to accept by science and many generations of testimony before us, that the mind has extra-physical dimensions. It's not just a tool of analysis and list making and cognition and motor function.
Right.
It has extra physical dimensions, and you can discover those. In fact, one of the only ways you can discover those is through concerted effort. There's no passivity involved. And the book is task-oriented as much as it's oriented toward the metaphysical.
Right. Well, it's kind of like when you're sitting having a conversation with somebody and they go into the zone. How many times do you tell them, where did you go?
Yeah. We never know.
Right.
Now, you mentioned a secret, and I have a complexity of feelings about The Secret. I respect Rhonda Byrne very much. I respect that she was able to set out as a producer, as a writer, as a thinker, and accomplish what she did. And there's a lot that I like about The Secret, insofar as I feel it has served as a very, very important entry point for people. And I like the values of the movie insofar as it's very encouraging of the individual to be nonconformist and to chart his or her own path. But where Rhonda and I differ is that she believes that we exist under one mental super law, which we call the law of attraction, colloquially. And I think that, yes, there is a law of mentation, there is a force of mentation, but that we exist under many laws and forces, and that's part of the task of life. We navigate many, many laws and forces, including laws of accident, including laws of mortality, including laws of physical decline. At the same time, the mind is one transcendent tool within that, and that's extraordinary enough. That's remarkable enough, and we neglect that. And we're never actually fully without resources in any situation if we come to understand that our mind is a tool of causation, even within the complex of factors that we have to live under.
Right. Well, you do talk a lot about, the fact that thoughts are causative.
Yes. I mean, that's the keynote of the book, really.
Right. Well,
And
how many times? Right. How many times do we hear, "Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it"?
Yes, and it's worth examining expressions like that. In the book, I tried to trace out the gestation of that expression. It's so popular. Where did it come from? And the best I've been able to find is that it originated in the work of the philosopher Goethe, who actually wrote, "What you wish for when you are young will come upon you in waves when you are old, so be careful." Now, a lot of people might look at that statement and say, well, gee, I don't agree with that, because the life I'm living perhaps is not the life I want to be living. I'm not getting in waves all the things I wished for. But what Goethe is really saying there, and what he's really asking the listener to do, is to kind of take a yellow light and say, well, wait a minute. What did you think about when you were very young? We tell ourselves what we thought about, but we rarely take the time in a mature, sustained way to peel back the onion and really ask ourselves that question. Because sometimes there is a long interval of time between thought and actualization. And within that interval, we can be very naturally forgetful. There's so many things going on in life that we can be truly forgetful of certain foundational ideas that we've harbored. And sometimes we've even harbored these ideas almost in an unconscious way, because we don't like, perhaps, some of these ideas. We feel they're not the way that we're supposed to think about life. We consider ourselves spiritual, and we don't like to feel that we're thinking about money or what have you, or any number of self-contradictions. And there are many ideas that we harbor within us that we kind of push down or push away. We like to view ourselves internally in ways that we think will reflect well within our peer group, within our family, within the world that we grew up in. And so we can become strangers to ourselves in a certain sense. And I think that's what Goethe is getting at in his statement. And so we can wish for things and get them and ask, gee, where did this come from, without recognizing any kind of an antecedent in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And just think of it. I mean, wonderful possibilities, wonderful potentials could be unlocked in the individual if he or she could come face to face with what is really wanted. What do you really, truly want? Mm-hmm. And I try to ask that question throughout the book as well, because we think we know what we want, and we repeat things to us by habit, but very often we don't really take the time to ask ourselves, what do I want, in a way that might even make us twitch and squirm that might even make us internally embarrassed. And I try to reassure the reader that if you can take that journey into what you really want, you may tap passions and discover things within yourself and give yourself a kind of almost arterial fast track to accessing possibilities and forces that are mental in nature that you've never experienced before, because we don't come face to face with our truest desires. And that's a step that can be so radical in a person's life. So that's a point to which I return frequently in the book.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, we are kind of programmed from when we're kids. We all get taught the same adages. Taking care of yourself is selfish. They convince us that we're here to serve everybody else except ourselves. We hear that, what will people think? Coming from an Italian family, that was a big one in my family. What will the neighbors think? Or I'm sure you've heard it. I mean, you're in New York, shanda for the neighbors. It's a shanda. It's a shanda.
Right.
And that really does shut us down on so many levels.
Yes, and people feel different pressures, sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit, in ways that they might never guess, And look, there could be somebody who is a hard driver within the business world who is miserable, who truly just wants to be at home, wrapped in a blanket, reading a book or something like that. There are people who call themselves spiritual, but who actually might have very public and very material ambitions. And none of this is to be condemned. I'm just asking the individual, where do you want to be? Who are you about? And sometimes I use a little exercise that imagine if you were to meet the mythical genie in the bottle, and the genie said to you, listen, I'm going to grant you one wish. And this wish can be for anything on earth that you want, provided you tell me exactly what that is. Because if you mislead me, you'll lose everything. And to a degree, that is a tough bargain. That is a tough bargain that life strikes with us. If you can zero in on precisely what you want in a very specific, definite way, you will get it, or you will get something very close to it. But if you harbor a whole pastiche of differing desires, some of which are self-contradictory, or if you hide from desires that you hold because you think they don't sound dignified, or you're embarrassed by them, or it's not how a spiritual person is supposed to think, or whatever it may be.
Right.
You wind up getting a mess. You wind up getting a muddle. You wind up getting nothing, And life permits us no halfway measures. And so a lot of the book and a lot of the royal road, I think, to the practices that are prescribed in New Thought, affirmations, visualizations, prayers, mental picturing, self-suggestion, all these things, they're all valid and good and important. But the royal road to using those things with greatest effectiveness is having an absolutely passionate focus. And so I challenge people to that. And it could be the greatest exploration you ever take in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One part of your book that I really liked, and I think it's towards the end of the book, is if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self. That made me go off. I felt like I was traveling along the path of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds with that question. I was like,
right.
Oh my God, this will take me forever to get through this.
Right. And it's interesting because it's something that we often take lightly, or we regard it as a novelty, or as a kind of a psychological game. But my challenge to the reader is, how do we know it's a game? How do we know it's a game? It deserves being taken very seriously, because I won't go into all the various theory and metaphysics and quantum physics here, but we've seen enough to know that time is bendable. Einstein's theories have been proven. Time is relative. Time is relative when you travel at or near the speed of light. We know that matter is relative. On a particle level, matter is actually in a wave state until somebody takes a measurement. And at the point of measurement, it gets localized into a definite particle state. So we know enough in the 21st century to say, well, look, of course, in our five-sensory existence here in the macro world, we experience things according to conventional Newtonian mechanics. But holes have been punched in that. And the old materialist paradigm, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't cover all the bases in the 21st century. Einstein and quantum theory and psychical research and so on have disrupted that. So there's something new coming into focus that hasn't come into focus yet, and it may not come into focus for some generations to come, but our generation realizes it. And the fact is, we know enough to make the statement that linear time is not absolute. Time is relative, and time bends. And it's entirely possible that linear time is nothing but a very useful and enormously persuasive device that allows us to get through the day in our ordinary five-sensory state. However, if linearity and materiality don't cover all the bases, how do I know that there's not a movement in time, a wave-like movement within an infinitude of possibilities that's going on always, that creates with it its own sense of past, present, future. Hence, the prospect of talking to your younger self, giving your younger self advice, say at age 15 or whatever age you feel is appropriate, it's possible that could actually be very real, that's more than just an intriguing novelty or a psychological game or a mental exercise. It could actually be happening. So again, we come back to Goethe. Be careful. Be careful.
Right. Well, that kind of reminds me of the work of John Bradshaw when he, did so much work on the inner child, rescuing your inner child, going back and reclaiming yourself as a child. And it's very, very valuable, and it works.
It works. Yeah.
So
it could be more than just an exercise.
Absolutely. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was right. When I went through some of his workshops, I felt like I was literally there. I was 5 years old again.
Isn't that remarkable?
Right. So you talk
it's
about
very possible.
Right. Yeah. So when you talked about in your book time collapsing, time collapse. What's really interesting is at the same time I was reading your book and reading about time collapse, one of my listeners suggested to me out of the blue, and there's an expression, that I should I should watch that Disney movie Wrinkle in Time. So I decided to watch it, even though, it's really a good movie for kids. But what was interesting is the FX in that totally showed time collapse, even though they didn't call it time collapse. And ever since I saw that segment, when I sit outside or I'm sitting somewhere, I can visualize everything around me collapsing.
How interesting. I haven't seen that movie. I'll have to watch it, but it's absolutely extraordinary the extent to which movies and stories capture things that are almost instinctively understood by the public. And movies seem to do this with a remarkable facility. People will watch a movie, whether it be The Truman Show or The Matrix or, some psychological horror movie, and, they'll say, my God, that's the thing I've been scared of all my life, or that's the thing I've been thinking of all my life. And somebody from another country or from another time zone will have the exact same experience and say, yes, even though no one quite put their finger on it before. It's absolutely extraordinary the way that powerful movies just seem almost to be projections of things that vast stretches of the public are thinking about but have never plainly articulated. So that's really interesting. I'll have to watch Wrinkle.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was on Netflix. Like I said, it's a kid's movie. It's certainly not a 10 by any means, but the visualizations in it, the way this kid figures out the math of what holds reality together, it's pretty fascinating to watch. But it was interesting because
I'm eager to see it. Cool.
As I was reading about time collapse, and that's another time I put your book down and really thought about it. Then I saw that movie, and there it was visually brought to me.
Yeah, and in the book, when I refer to a time collapse, I'm talking about these very sensitive moments that I think we've all experienced in life, where past, present, future seem to melt all one into the other. And I think that is a kind of an exit from our typical five-sensory understanding of reality and of linearity. And sometimes at very sensitive moments, sometimes when we're experiencing euphoria or sometimes grief or sometimes just some emotionally heightened moment where everything in us sort of stops and we're subject to a kind of shock, and the usual habitual grinding of the wheels within comes to a sudden halt. What rushes in, sometimes momentarily, sometimes longer than momentarily, what rushes in is this experience of infinitude, of past, present, future, all being there at once. And we must pay attention to those moments, because I think those moments are tremendously informative to us as to what's really going on in life.
Right. Well, I'd like to share with you, when I was 4 years old, I had a near-death experience. And
Really? Wow.
when I came to, here I was, in Brooklyn. I mean, I know you'll appreciate this, in an Italian community in Brooklyn. I'm 4 years old, maybe approaching 5. And when I finally came back to consciousness, we'll call it, when I would sit and talk with my sisters, because I have plenty, we'd be playing outside, and I would look at them and pause. And I would tell them, right now, we're all old ladies sitting around talking and laughing.
Isn't that something?
So it was like I knew that all time existed at the same time, and I was trying to explain it in the mid-1950s to kids in Brooklyn.
Right.
So
Right.
So as you progress in life and you see how all these things come together and you really get learned and you experience, you realize that we do indeed, and your book makes it so clear, that we do exist, in two different worlds, that this isn't all there is.
Yes, that's beautifully put. And it's funny, I'm reminded of David Lynch said one time about growing up in Missoula, Montana. He would have all kinds of remarkable experiences, and he would say, and let me tell you, Missoula is not the surrealism capital of the world. So, I mean, you could say the same thing,
Right.
Canarsie, Brooklyn, for an Italian kid in the 1950s, was not the metaphysical capital of the world.
No, it wasn't.
I'm sure you had, right.
Well, I know. Listen, only the rich Italians lived in Canarsie. We lived in South Brooklyn, so we were down by the Brooklyn docks, the piers. And my uncles basically were dock workers. So I remember the first time after that experience happened and my mom told me to go outside and play. I didn't want to. I just didn't want to. I said to her, I don't want to go out and play with these other children because I just felt like they were so beneath me. And that wasn't an ego thing. I was only 5.
I understand.
But when
I totally get it.
Right. But when I hit the street and I looked at, the brownstones, which now are worth a lot, but in those days it was a slum. In my opinion, I was living in a ghetto. You could barely see the sun through the buildings. There wasn't a blade of grass or a tree for miles unless you walked to Prospect Park. And I looked out and I said, this isn't the way we're supposed to be living. Where is home and how do I get home? I was aware of all those things. And I could very clearly see that this reality was not a reality I enjoyed.
That's fascinating. I totally understand. You had an experience of perspective at a very young age, and there was no way to share that perspective. It's like trying to share a sensory feeling. You can't bring another person into it.
No, the old Italian ladies in my neighborhood called me the Antichrist. In Italian, they would call me Mala Cristiana because I knew things. I knew things about them. I just had an awareness that I just came back with. I don't know how else to explain it. And, even doing my work and my show all these years, my intuition, I'll call it my intuition, just sees everything as clearly as possible. And it's always upset me that, even in school, why do these kids not see what I see? Why don't they understand what's going on, what they're being taught? So it was very frustrating for me in a lot of ways.
Yes. Well, the church has its own lexicon of occult practices. They just give it a different name and thus make it sound reassuring. So instead of channeling, it's called locutions or something like that, but it's the same basic thing that's going on. And yet, religions rename things so they can claim them. And when these things occur outside of the vocabulary of a certain religion, that's when people start using terms like Antichrist. But you had an experience of the ultimate, and it changed your life.
Right. And listen, it wasn't easy growing up that way.
I hear you.
But then I finally grew into myself, and I learned when to zig and when to zag, when to talk and when to just shut up. Because it wasn't worth the slaps across the face. Nobody liked to hear the truth coming out of a little girl.
Right.
So it was interesting days indeed. But reading your book, like I said, it took me back to so many things. I loved when you talked about Napoleon Hill, and of course I've read Napoleon Hill, and sometimes I felt he was contradictory as well. But one of the greatest things I think he ever came out with was the concept of a mastermind group.
Yes. I just had a brief meeting with my mastermind group this morning. A mastermind group is a group of trusted people who gather together in a spirit of harmony and cooperation, and they exchange and share goals, aims, intimacies with one another. And it's a hugely important tool in Napoleon Hill's work that often gets neglected because it's group work, and we all like to be lone wolves in a certain way, but it is group work, and it's very important because one of the things Napoleon Hill places his finger on quite early is that sometimes it is, while it's profoundly important to have colleagues and confidants, you have to choose them very, very carefully. You can't just go around blurting out your plans and dreams and wishes to just anybody, and you just provided a case in point of that in describing how things were reinforced in your childhood neighborhood. And yet the group is so vital and so important, and it can heighten energies. And so that was one of his great innovations. In fact, I have another book coming out next year just on that subject alone, because the mastermind is the most neglected step in Hill's work, but he said it was absolutely vital to success and to progress for the individual.
Absolutely. Listen, I have a friend in New York who's got his own brokerage on Wall Street. And when I asked him, what's the secret of your success? Because even during the crash, his people didn't lose any money. He said that every New Year's Day, he rereads Think and Grow Rich.
Isn't that something? That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Right. But, let's get back to that let's get back to the mastermind topic, because I know there's a lot of people listening who say, I don't have that many friends. I don't have that many colleagues with people, with things in common. But he also said your mastermind group could actually be pulling in the greatest minds that ever lived before you. They could be imaginary, we'll call them. Okay. But if you wanted to sit with Einstein, you could visualize Einstein sitting around the table with you, Lincoln, whatever, and get yourself in a meditative state and create a mastermind group that way.
Well, he talked about that group as his imaginary council, and yes, he did prescribe that. And he did say that your mastermind group could also be as few as 2 people. Mm-hmm. It could be anywhere from 2 to maybe 7 people. And that's something a person should keep in mind. You only need to find one other individual in order to make it happen, and then you can augment it with your imaginary council. And so he was sensitive to the needs of people. I don't think Napoleon Hill gave anybody any exercises that were out of reach. And I believe at this point, and I, like your friend, I reread Think and Grow Rich on a regular basis. I think I've done all the exercises in the book. I don't think I've ever omitted anything, at least at this point in my journey. And it's another thing I love about Hill. You're really going to do it. And in the Miracle Club, I write about having resisted some of his exercises. And then when I kind of threw myself into Think and Grow Rich in earnest, and that was in the year 2013, things really began to change. You have to go all the way with it. Again,
right.
There's no halfway.
Did you read his recently released book? It came out about, I don't want to say maybe a few years ago. It was held back for 76 years, and it's called Outwitting the Devil.
I have not read that. That's one hole in my reading, and I got to get to that.
That's a great book.
The second person who's recommended it. Recently.
Right. And for my listeners that are new to the show, I have an interview with Sharon Lecter, who put that book together. It's still in the archives if you guys want to go in and listen to it. Years ago, Mitch, when I was making a living in New York as a painter, I had a one-woman show in Soho, and, I got to the top of the charts in no time flat. One night I decided that I was going to put those principles to action when I got in my studio, and I actually put out any painter that wants to come through and paint is welcome to come through and paint. and I sat in my studio. It was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, my entire palette changed. And I painted furiously for about 2 hours. And when I stood back from the painting, it was a Monet.
Oh, no kidding.
So when my dealer from New York came to see what I was working on, and he saw that painting, he said, "Where did you get that Monet?" And I said, "You'll never believe me if I tell you."
Guess where?
Right. So,
Right.
so when you talk about universal consciousness and all time, being the same, I mean, people need to realize that even though you may pass from the physical, it doesn't mean, like in that movie with Robin Williams, you just died, you're not dead. So, you could have a lot of fun with this and be very successful. I mean, he never came through again, but it was one of my paintings that I really treasured. It was one of those not for sale paintings.
Yes, got you. Very interesting. I always encourage people to read Think and Grow Rich, even if they don't consider themselves entrepreneurs or business people. It's really a model text on how to actualize ideas. And I say to people, if you're a graduate student, if you're an artist, if you're an activist, you're selling yourself short if you don't read that book, because it's how to effectively transform ideas into actual projects. And some people avoid it because they think the title is too materialistic or what have you. But I think it's one of the greatest New Thought books ever written.
Absolutely. Mitch, we need to take a short break, so stay with us. Mitch and I will be right back.
Hi, this is Monica Sepulveda of Wake Up with Meria and Monica. You can hear us together on Maria's show every second Tuesday of every month. We provide a lot of solutions and positive tools for you to use to overcome the negativity on this planet, to actually shift the planet. As we change, everything changes. But this is not why I'm giving you this little promotion here about our show. Actually, I really want to let you know how fantastic Meria is as a reader. She's probably the most accurate one I've ever met in my life, and I've met a lot. Been doing my work for 47 years, and I'm more of a medium, and I do readings, but man, she's really the best. I'm so humbled to be on her show, and between you and me, I'm going to give you a little secret. Maria's prices are going to go up in January or the first part of next year. So if I were you, I'd get yourself a reading or 2 or 3 so that you're taken care of for next year at the current prices. And like everything goes up, Meria is underpaid, as she deserves to be paid a lot more. I am not exaggerating. She absolutely is the best. And I hope that you continue listening to our show. Thanks. Have a beautiful day, and make it a great day, actually. It's our choice, isn't it?
Okay, welcome back to the show. I'm speaking with Mitch Horowitz. We're talking about his latest book, The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality, How to Create Miracles in Your Life. And yes, miracles are real. They're not what the church teaches you, but they are real. Mitch's website, if you want to check out his work, is mitchhorowitz.com. I have a live link here. You can just click through and surf through his page. Mitch, you talk about in the book mind metaphysics. And that's a term I haven't seen anybody else use.
Oh, gosh, that's just my catch-all term for New Thought, positive thinking, secret law of attraction. I have my differences with the mainstream of some of these practices. I have my differences with certain terminology. For example, I don't use the term manifest. I think it's more an act of selection based on what we were talking about previously in terms of the infinitude of time. I think our emotional states, our perspective involves us in an act of selection from among an infinitude of possibilities. So select rather than manifest is my preferred term, and I tend not to personally use the term law of attraction because, colloquially speaking, law of attraction is often used to connote that we live under one overall mental super law.
Right.
And I think, as I was saying earlier, we live under many laws and forces.
Right.
Nonetheless, positive thinking, law of attraction, the secret New Thought, this is my neighborhood, this is my world, this is my commitment. I chart my own path within it. So I use the term mind metaphysics as a general catch-all term.
I like it.
Refer to. Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you.
I like it. I said I'm going to be using it. So I'm going to tell Mitch I'm ripping that off.
Please do. Please
You know,
do.
when I look at your bio and I see the two sides of your life, okay, I'm going to call it the two sides of your life. You've got one foot in the real world and you've got one foot in the world that matters. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
And you talk about, that we have to balance being in both worlds, the seen and the unseen. And I enjoy that. Yeah, I enjoy that part of your life story because I've always been there. Like on my show, one day I could be railing on the news and this reality. And then there's the other me, who I'd like to say is my spiritual self, my intuitive self, my psychic self, my spiritual counselor self. And I balance the two all the time. It's a fine line, though, to stay with one foot in both worlds.
Well, one of the things that I'm proud of and that I've worked really hard on is I write and speak to audiences from a variety of worlds, academic, cultural, the alternative spiritual culture, the mainstream press. And I try, and I think succeed, in never changing my tone, my outlook, my message, regardless of who I'm writing for or who I'm speaking to. I won't check my beliefs at the door, for example, when I write an article that appears in a mainstream place. For example, last week I had a piece in the Washington Post about the gratitude movement. And I've written in the Washington Post about the whole time collapse idea. And sometimes I'm delighted and thrilled at what I actually get away with, but it's a principle of mine that I don't wear one hat when I'm speaking to my alternative spiritual audience and another hat when I'm speaking to mainstream readers. I have one point of view, and I try to carry it into wherever I'm going, whether I'm speaking at a New Age center or a university. I say the same things, and I've worked very hard at that because I want to be transparent with people about where I'm coming from and what I believe.
Well, and you are. I mean, don't you think that's absolutely divine?
It's been one of the greatest gifts of my life, to say, listen, respectability be damned, I'm going to be transparent. And as soon as I said that, not only did I feel a great deal more relaxed, but no doors closed, and if anything, more doors opened.
Right. Well, I just want my audience to know my transparency has earned me another 30-day ban on Facebook, so don't look for me there for the next 30 days. Well, listen, I'm always me, and there's a lot of people who say, I wish I was this or I wish I was that. To me, I've never wanted to be anything but myself. I like myself, and it doesn't matter to me whether other people like me or not. It never mattered to me.
I also believe very strongly that seriousness doesn't come from the choice of one's topic. It comes from how you treat your topic. And I'm always trying to remind people of that. There's no topic within the spiritual culture that should be shunted or pushed away. I've known scholars, for example, who were interested in channeling, and they would confide to me their interests, but they would ask that I not share it. And I respect people's privacy, so if they ask me not to share something, I won't share it. But I thought, my God, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? If this is a serious interest of yours, then talk about it, exchange about it, defend it. We're far too afraid that we're not going to get invited somewhere because we've disclosed some interest or something that's not supposed to be respectable. I think that there's a different way.
I totally agree. Listen, it was just like, we can go back to the beginning of our discussion. I had two crazy Italian parents. We were living in East New York, which was, as you know, well, you may not know, but at that time it was primarily Jewish. It was primarily Jewish. I was 15 before I knew what a bagel was, and I fell in love with bagels, as my waistline at the time could have told you. But I remember when my parents would start scream fighting, the windows of the house would be open, and my mother would run around during the argument, shutting the windows. My father would run behind her, opening the windows. And I remember at one point, because my mother was so worried, what will the neighbors think, okay? Yeah. And that's, listen, growing up in East New York is where I got all my Yiddish from, so it was always a shanda for the neighbors. And I remember confronting my mother after one of those, dramatic Lucy and Desi scenes, Italian style. And I said to her, I says, Ma, why do you worry so much about what other people think? I said, they don't pay your bills, and chances are they don't even pay their own bills. So why do you give them that power? And I was only about 15 when I said that, Mitch. But that's always been my attitude, and there's way too many people, I think, that stop their own freedom in their own life because they're worried about what other people will think.
Yes. Well, the spiritual teacher Krishnamurti, who's been a great influence on me, made the observation that nothing does more to stymie personal creativity and self-development than the wish for respectability. Wishing to be respectable has a terrible stifling influence, he taught, on the ability of the individual to really arrive at a sense of self, sense of creativity, self-possibility.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you talk about in your book about integrity. Now, I have to tell you, my father was a stickler for integrity. We heard that every day of our lives. He was like a character builder on hyperspeed. And, when I think of integrity, I think of being true to yourself. That's where integrity starts. And, I went to high school at Thomas Jefferson High School in East New York.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
High school of the singer. A lot of people came out of Thomas Jefferson High School. Steve Gourmet, the singer Steve Gourmet, went to Thomas Jefferson High School.
Right. I mean, so many great people. Right. So no, he was a little bit ahead of my time, but he did live in the next town from me when I lived in Long Beach. Steve and Ada lived in, I believe they lived in Lido Beach at the time.
I love him. I'm a huge fan.
Right. But one thing, we had this big statue in the main hall where we had always pass while we were changing classes of Thomas Jefferson, of course. And on the bottom it said, "To thine own self be true."
Oh.
And I mean, I saw that every day. At least, you change classes 8 times a day. So it really sunk in. Even when you don't think you're seeing it, it still goes into your psyche. And I've never apologized for who I am. People, you're either going to like me or love me. It doesn't matter. Okay. I like me. And that's what matters. And having that integrity and, reading your book and just about you, I realized that you are a man of integrity and you have to be fearless to be that.
I'm trying. I can't live with myself if I present 2 different messages to 2 different audiences. I can't live with myself.
Well, I'm going to say the same thing to you. I've said to so many people, stop using the word trying, just say you're doing.
Yeah, right.
Now, you talk a lot about wealth, and a lot of people today, of course, are all concerned with money. And reading your book, I realized where I'm making my mistakes as far as my own personal wealth. Maybe because I have too much integrity, or maybe because I haven't been clear enough. So it made me stop, it made me sit down and start journaling in detail what I truly desire. So that was huge for me because, like I said, sometimes we forget what we know works. And you talk about wealth coming from within. Can you explain that to the audience?
Well, I think that, again, we live under a complex of laws and forces, and part of what happens to us absolutely is created from within, and that to some extent, not wholly and not entirely, but to some extent, wealth is self-generated by suggestions that we give to ourselves, priorities that we make, and I think something more, because my contention in the book is that our thoughts and our mental conditioning go beyond self-suggestion, go beyond cognitive functioning, but there is, without question, an extra physical dimension to our minds. We've seen enough, for example, in serious ESP research to be able to say that with certainty. And one friend of mine suggested that it could be that what's happening during all this positive thinking is, in a certain sense, an act of telepathy, that we're constantly kind of casting out signals, so to speak, looking for people who can help us or lend a hand or meet us halfway or something like that. That's just one way. That's just one dimension in which I think the mind informs or helps to bring about what is going to happen to us, including in matters of money. And it's interesting. I write about an exercise of Napoleon Hill's that I resisted for many years, and that is writing down a certain sum of money and the date by which you want to receive it. Mm-hmm. And I finally gave up resisting this and decided I would do this. And I did, and I write about this in the book, and I would provide pictures of it for any doubters. I did write down a certain sum of money within Think and Grow Rich on a yellow sticky pad, and the date by which I wanted to receive it. And then I had consciously forgotten about it, and I came back to the book months and months later, and I found that I had received exactly that sum of money right about by the date that I had prescribed. And I was shocked, and I was euphoric. And it strengthened my conviction that I should continue with this exercise, continue with this experiment. And I think that giving ourselves a definite fixed sum and a date can serve as a kind of remarkable inducement to the mind to move us in directions, almost like we're a heat-seeking missile that will help assure that we reach the destination we've specified. And for years, as I mentioned, I resisted writing down sums of money. It felt gauche, it felt unspiritual, it seemed to go against my ethics. But I think we have to come to terms with the fact that this is part of the world that we live in. We live in a world of Caesar, and we live in the world of the transcendent, and we owe something to both.
Right.
And something from both is owed to us. So I think getting comfortable with that approach and not feeling that it's unspiritual is important. It certainly made a difference for me, and it's still making a difference for me because I'm still working, frankly, with getting comfortable with that.
Well, me too. And it was that part of your book that made me sit down and write and realize that I had not done that. And I realized,
very interesting.
I realized that I was not happy where I am, but I also realized that I had forgotten to do that. You know, it reminds me of Jim Carrey. I'm sure you heard Jim Carrey's life story. You know, he was a nobody and a nothing, and, you know, he wrote himself a check that he expected to be a millionaire. I don't remember by what age. And he put it in his pocket, and by that age, he not only had that money, but he had more than that.
Yeah, I've heard that story, and I take that very, very seriously. I write down things. I carry things with me. I believe very deeply in affirmations, reminders, visualizations. But again, the key to all this is having a definite, passionate focus, knowing exactly what it is that you want and feeling it with total integrity and total passion. A lot of times when people are struggling with the right way to do an affirmation, or how should I write something down, or how should I pray, or do I have to use present tense, do I have to adopt the feeling that I've received it, etc. To a degree, I think all those things can just be mere details that distract us from what's most important, which is having an absolute passionate focus. And when you do, those other things come into play much more easily, more naturally. I don't want people to get hung up on, am I doing this affirmation right or wrong? If it speaks to your heart, if it's sincere, if the emotional language is innerly persuasive to you, then say it any way you want. Do it any way you want. There's no right or wrong way to pray, to visualize, to affirm. I think we get too hung up with outer form, and we get hung up with outer form, and we get distracted for the very reason that we don't have a definite focus. We don't have a passionate focus. So it becomes about the pie crust.
Right.
Whenever we don't have a definite center, it always becomes about the periphery.
All right, I'm hearing the sounds of New York behind you.
Yes, welcome home.
This is reality, folks. That's how you know this is a live show. You're hearing the sounds of New York, and I have to tell you, I don't.
Prepared for you.
I don't really miss those sounds. Here, the biggest sounds I hear are the inhuman-sized crows walking on the roof of my house, and they sound like human beings. They're so big. You talk about
a little throwback for you.
I love it. You talk about petitionary prayer. It seems that most people are either reciting prayers, you know, from their church or their religion or whatever, or they're always asking for things. What's the difference between that and petitionary prayer?
Well, petitionary prayer really means asking a higher power for something in a very concrete, unembarrassed way. And I believe in petitionary prayer. I really do. I think that prayer is a kind of an escape hatch for us when we're maybe going through periods of deep anxiety or grief, and we're unable to focus our minds in the constructive ways that we like. Life can be brutal, and there is suffering, and it's, I think, unfair, frankly, to tell a suffering person to enter into a feeling state of having already received that which he or she desires.
Right.
And that's the royal road to manifestation or actualization or what have you. Yes, that has scriptural precedent, but in Scripture you'll also find the matriarchs and the patriarchs arguing with the Creator, arguing with God, getting angry with God, telling God, the burden that you've given me is too much. Cain himself does that. Cain says to God, you've made me into a nomad who's going to wander across the earth. People will kill me. People will take my possessions. This punishment is too great. And God says, okay, and he amends it. And he places a mark on Cain, protecting him from violence and from thieves and from those who would violate him. So here's an instance of someone committing an act of fratricide, telling the Creator, look, the punishment you gave me it's more than I can bear. Mm-hmm. And God apparently changes his mind, changes course, and amends the punishment. There are no rules when it comes to prayer. I think you can beg, you can cry, you can be on your knees, you can be euphoric. Yes, you can enter into a calm feeling state of having received, but I don't believe there are any walls and parameters.
Hey,
I think prayer is there for us.
I'm laughing.
We're driven.
The only reason I'm laughing is I've done them all. Believe me.
Yes, and keep doing them all.
Right.
Keep doing them all.
There's many times
when
I'll
you pray
just
and something happens.
Right.
It's extraordinary. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And things do happen.
Well, I also
Things do
like
happen.
that. I like your description of God in your book. And comparing our human imagination as God. That is God to us.
Yes.
And I think that, unfortunately, especially today, it wasn't so bad when I was a kid. I noticed it more in the 70s when I was raising my children. That's when teachers and schools started complaining about children daydreaming or using their imagination in class. So it's almost like a deliberate disconnection from who you really are. I was allowed to freely imagine, and I think that helped me in my career, especially as an artist. But today, people think, using your imagination is stupid. Or, their kid will say, I have an invisible friend. Right away, they put that child down. But imagination is what everything we see, do, and touch was created from. Someone's imagination.
Yes, it's the creative element of life. And as you were alluding earlier, it also requires a great deal of persistence and work. And it's not an excuse for somebody not to do his or her homework or, clean the room or something. It's like these things, again, different worlds, the transcendent, the imaginative, the world of Caesar, these things all have claims on us. And we have claims on them. We exist within these different worlds. And passion seems to be the gelling agent that links it all together. If you love what you're doing, you will work, you will imagine, you will be able to tap the different tools that are made available to us. It's getting to that point of passion. That's, I think, the greatest gift that's given to us, and we mustn't forsake it.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm extremely passionate about my work. It's more important to me than anything else. And I think that I made it too important where I forgot that I should get paid for what I'm doing. Okay. Well, I shouldn't have to worry about money, because to me money is just like in the background, because I'm so passionate. Every morning I wake up, I have a sense of purpose. I have to tell the world what's going on. I've had that feeling, unfortunately, since I was 5 years old. And I love what I do, and I think I'm really good at it, and that's not ego, okay? Because I have a lot of friends that wish to God I would stop doing what I do, okay? Yeah. Because sometimes I can come across as Debbie Downer to them. But to me, you have to be aware of everything going on this planet if you live on this planet. And I find it very exciting. I find education very exciting. I've always loved to learn. And your book helped kind of give me a reality check on, okay, you forgot that you need to do this too, Meria. And I want to thank you for that, Mitch, because it really matters to me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Nothing is more meaningful to me than to hear that this book goes out and touches people's lives, because I've written largely as a historian, as a journalist, as a chronicler of metaphysical experience, and this was a departure for me as a practical book, and there will be more to come.
Well, make sure
it was very meaningful for me.
All right. Well, make sure your publisher keeps me on her review list.
Oh, you better believe it.
Because I'd love to have you
Sure.
back on the show. Mitch, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you. Delighted.
You're
Thank
most welcome. You take good care now.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Mitch Horowitz, The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality. And as you can tell, I really enjoyed the book. It's one of those books that's never leaving my house. So I hope you guys got something good out of today's show. And I want to thank you all for supporting my show and for understanding me and for staying with me. And some of you have been with me since I started this show online 18 years ago. Some of you still with me since I did radio in the Valley. So again, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'll be back on Thursday with the news, and I'll see you guys then.
Thank you for listening and supporting The Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.